Um, so this week's Parsha is Parshat Mishpatim, and it is largely a code of lots of laws, very legal, a little bit dry. And then tucked in there, in this beautiful way, is Bnei Israel's declaration of Naaseh v'nishma. And I want to look at the text a little bit more closely and figure out what it means to be someone who, or a people who are Naaseh and Nishma. And we'll define some of the terms as we go. So we see in Parshat Shmos, in Parshat Mishpatim in Shmos, in Perek Kaf Daled, that it says V'ikach Sefer Habrit, right? This is all the laws that Moshe learned from Hashem. V'ikra ba'eznei ha'am, and read them out loud to the people. Vayomru kol asher diber Hashem naaseh v'nishma. And they, Bnei Israel, responded presumably to hearing the Sefer Habrit being read out loud by saying Naaseh v'nishma. So, Sefaria even acknowledges that this is a somewhat complicated phrase to translate. Naaseh meaning to do, nishma meaning to hear, but it's certainly not clear from the pshat of the text exactly what it means. So if we look at the Rashbam, he has one interesting perspective, and then we'll look at two more modern commentaries as well. So the Rashbam says here, what does it mean to be Naaseh Nishma? Naaseh Masha Diber, right? To do, we will do or carry out what God has already said. So that's like a backwards look, right? We just heard all of the Sefer Habrit. Naaseh, we'll do that. And nishma is like an intention. V'gan nishma ma sheyitzavenu od mikan v'lahavi v'nekayim. Right, and so it's almost like an anticipation. We know that we didn't get the whole Torah, and so we want to have our intent that we will carry out whatever we hear next, sort of like an all-inclusive clause. Right. And I think that often we've heard of it from that idea of like, we'll do it even though we didn't know it. And here the Rashbam is saying, well, hold on, like we did know some things, right? We just heard that they heard the Sefer Habrit. So the Naaseh part is about what they've already done. Mishma is like, we will listen, and it's understood that we will do moving forward from there. There are a lot of interesting midrashim about what it was like to be at Har Sinai at that moment and why Bnei Israel said Naaseh v'nishma. I didn't put it on the page here, but some might be familiar with the midrash that it was like quite coercive. God lifted the mountain of Har Sinai above the heads of Bnei Israel, and they yelled like, "Okay, Naaseh v'nishma, just don't drop the mountain on us." And so there's this idea that there was like some kind of it's like a desperate cry. We'll do it, even if we don't know what it is yet, because we don't want to get in trouble. But there's a beautiful, another reframing way of thinking about it from the works of Rav Kook. So Rav Kook, writing from Israel, Rabbi Hanan Morrison wrote a beautiful book called Silver from the Land of Israel, where he translates and then interprets or extrapolates some of the writings of Rav Kook. So here he, it's a bit long, but we'll sort of unpack and take breaks as we go for comments and thoughts. He talks about it as two separate promises. So sort of like the Rashbam, right? The Rashbam is saying, we'll do what we heard, we'll listen to what we haven't heard yet. And here he says also there are two promises, and that the order is crucial. So they, Bnei Israel, promised to keep the Torah even before knowing why. So here, Rav Kook's theory, right, is that Naaseh before Nishma, right? It's a sequential promise. We will do, and then we will listen. And the Midrash in the Gemara in Shabbat 88a related that in merit of this pledge of loyalty, the angels rewarded each Jew with 2 crowns. And a heavenly voice explained, "Who revealed to my children the secret used by the angels?" So this is a somewhat confusing Midrash. Sadly, after the Chet HaEgel, the Gemara tells us one of the crowns got taken away. So it's good we got 2 for the Naaseh and the Nishma right now. But there's something interesting about this, the fact that angels get involved, and that it's such a great statement that Bnei Israel earned these 2 crowns. So Rabbi Morrison goes on, quoting Rabbi Cook, to say, what was so special about this vow? We will do and we will listen. On the contrary, would not fulfilling mitzvot with understanding and enlightenment be a superior level of Torah observance? So that question, I think, is worthy of pause here for a moment, right? And I'm curious what people think. Is it better to say you will do something as like a leap of faith before knowing what it is? Or is it better to understand and know the thing and then commit to doing it, because that's like a real commitment? Does anyone have an opinion? No need, but if someone does.
Well,
Sorry
Jewish tradition, I guess it's all from here, is that you do things first and then understand them later.
Yes, definitely. I think that is, I like it, Mark. I think that, right, that is one like stream that we can take from here, which is that like that faith is the kernel, right? It's the basis, definitely.
Could I interrupt, Yale? You hear
Please.
me? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I find it very difficult. I don't know about anybody else, but there is an echo in your voice. Or is it just my computer?
Marvin, I think are you connected in two places?
Yeah, I think you're connected twice. That's what's
Yeah,
going
that
on.
would definitely cause an echo.
Okay, let's just leave it then.
Can you turn the sound off of one of the devices you're on? That might help you.
Okay.
Okay. I hope that works better. That must be disconcerting to listen like that.
Okay.
Okay. Hopefully is this better?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, I think Mark, right? Mark is explaining the very the mainstream approach, which is like there's something special about doing before you understand. But I do think that this question is an interesting one to unpack. And then Rav Kook asks a second question: why does the Midrash refer to this form of unquestioning allegiance as a secret used by the angels? Right? There seems, in some ways, that like underscores how holy it is that the angels do it also. But why the angels? So he has a few answers here. While wisdom is usually acquired through study and contemplation, there exists in nature an intuitive knowledge that requires no formal education. The bee, for example, naturally knows the optimal geometric shape for building honeycomb cells. No bee has ever needed to register for engineering courses at MIT. Intuitive knowledge also exists in the spiritual realm. Angels are sublime spiritual entities who do not require extensive Torah study in order to know how to serve God. Their holiness is ingrained in their very nature. It is only human beings prone to being confused by pseudoscientific indoctrination who need to struggle in order to return to their pristine spiritual selves. So there's something that I find deeply appealing to that, which is that like it's sort of like a gut thing, right? Being Jewish, it's like you feel it in your kishkas somewhere, and you don't need the formal education to know it. So saying Naaseh v'nishma is not really like knowing nothing. It's like knowing that you've got it. You're on the right track kind of thing. I don't know. Are there any MIT engineering graduates here who want to disagree?
I just have a comment. I think it's actually really cool because I think also I was thinking about it, like if you really trust someone and say, hey, can you do me a favor? You might just say sure without even knowing what the favor is. So I was kind of thinking that that's kind of how it was with the Jewish people, that they had so much God. They were like, yeah, what we believe in you. So whatever it is. I mean, obviously the amount of stuff with them, but I was just thinking it's kind of like that if you trust someone enough, you're kind of sure without really knowing what you're getting yourself into.
I like that. So it's not like that you would, that B'nai Israel would say Naaseh v'nishma to anybody, but Naaseh v'nishma applied to the God who just did all of these otot and muftim for B'nai Israel and signs and wonders and took them out of slavery. And so there's like a trust bond formed there. And that, I think the angel thing works really well in that Sahaba, right? That the angels have that relationship with Hashem already. And so they can also do that trust piece. Yeah, Mark, I see you raised your hand.
That was by accident. Oh, Mark.
Like that.
Oh, sorry, other Mark. I know we're back to 2 Marks. What a blessing.
You couldn't tell that was with a C? Mark, are you in Israel?
No, we came back.
The Sabres
Oh.
are back amongst us. We can celebrate.
Oh, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we're happy to be back.
We're happy you're back.
All right, Mark with a C. I see you have
Part
your.
of this, I was just going to say, what it makes me think of is just the arcade, the Binding of Isaac story. Just that, that seems like the example par excellence of just being willing to do something without questioning. I'm wondering if that's
It's a super interesting, it's like a provocative, I think, example to bring up, right? Because when we think about, or when I think about the Akedah, it feels like a time where that almost went wrong, went awry, right? That trust was not a good thing necessarily. I mean, maybe at the end it worked out. I guess if you see it, the whole.
I agree
Yeah.
with you from my perspective, but I think traditionally, like as Mark Saper was saying, just that's seen as the ultimate achievement. I mean, there's nothing greater show of faith than being willing to sacrifice your son you've waited 100 years for. I'll take that play out.
Oh, great. Yeah, thinking like within Zahava's analogy, right? It's like you build this relationship of trust with God. And so God says, do me a favor. And you say, sure. And then God says, take your only son and sacrifice him. It takes incredible emunah to be able to like follow through on that thing. Right. But it might also, I could imagine that would damage your willingness to say Naaseh v'nishma the next time that God says, please do this thing for me. Yeah, and I think there's something both appealing but also a little bit dangerous about thinking of God as like someone who asks for things from Bnei Israel, like as opposed to the Har Sinai model, like hovering above them, where God demands something of Bnei Israel. But yes, I think that I like the idea that there is some trust earned over time, right? God asked for the Akedah and did not actually cause a terrible death to come about, right? And so maybe that builds that sort of national memory of trust. Yeah, we know you won't ask something that is too far or pushes us too much. Interesting. Right, and in fact, Rav Kook's conclusion, as told through Rabbi Morrison, is that for the Jews who stood at Mount Sinai, it was not only Torah and mitzvot that were revealed, they also discovered their own true inner essence. They attained a sublime level of natural purity and intuitively proclaimed, we will do. We will follow our natural essence, unhindered by any spurious artificial conventions. And so here, I think, right, Rav Kook is really leaning into Mark's Mark with a K, his way of explaining the Naaseh v'nishma, right? That there's like a huge purity to being able to say, I feel this connection with God. I intuitively know it is going to be good and it is going to be right. Maybe based on trust, maybe just based on like a feeling in that moment. And I think that, right, when we say that we were all at Har Sinai, that makes this even stronger for us, right? All of us received this inner essence, this inner sort of compass at Har Sinai, the sort of the secondary goal, or maybe the primary goal, but the unstated goal, right? Often, like when I think there are a lot of teachers in this room, far more expert than I am, right? But like sometimes you teach the topic as a way of actually teaching some other skill set, and the content is like kind of the secondary byproduct of that. And that's kind of what it feels to me like Reb Kook is saying, that the Torah and mitzvot were important, and it was important to reveal them, but by revealing them, the true inner essence of Bnei Israel comes out, and that maybe was like the primary objective of God at Har Sinai.
The Nishma is very important because it's important. I mean, when somebody says something, you can often take it very many different ways.
Okay.
It's important to figure out what they really meant by it.
Right there. So this kind of like, will you do me a favor? Sure. What is it? Definitely lends itself to misunderstanding. Right. And I think that is something to that question that Rav Kook asks here, which is like, wouldn't it have felt better to have understanding and enlightenment and then accept the Torah, because there's something like much clearer about understanding what you're accepting. Definitely. And we'll see like a little bit of that echoed here. So Rabbi Sachs wrote a beautiful article called Doing and Hearing. And this is all from that that article, but I isolated out the Isaac Arama from the Akedat Yitzchak. The Akedat Yitzchak is a beautiful source. It is very lengthy. I tried to find and sort of isolate the original text, and I couldn't find it. So my apologies. But I think that obviously Rabbi Sachs will do a beautiful job of explaining him. So thinking about this source as two separate sources. So first is the Akedat Yitzchak. And he says that the word Shema can have this sense of understanding, right? Like Charles was just saying, as in God's statement about the Tower of Babel, right? Where it says in Breshit Yod Aleph, let us then go down and confound their speech so that they will not understand Yishma'u, one another's speech, right? So that the Tower of Babel is when they all speak one language and God gives them many, many languages, and then they no longer understand each other. And Nishma is about understanding there. So it's not about like the act of physically hearing in your ear, but it's about understanding. According to this explanation, when the Israelites put doing before understanding, they were giving expression to a profound philosophical truth. There are certain things we only understand by doing. We only understand leadership by leading. We only understand authorship by writing. We only understand music by listening. Reading books about these things is not enough. So it is with faith. We can only understand Judaism by living in accordance with its commands. You cannot comprehend a faith from the outside. Doing leads to understanding. So I don't know what people think about this idea. I will say it resonated with me. When I was in college, I spent a month in India in a very rural, poor neighborhood. And when I got home, I said, like, when you see the Statue of Liberty or the Eiffel Tower and like all these like sort of Western countries, like I felt like seeing it on TV was kind of the same as seeing it in real life. There was something certainly cooler, but like I couldn't really understand poverty, right? Like developing world poverty until I actually like saw it and felt it and smelled it and all of those true like hands-on experiences. And so too, I sort of think that that is what the Akedat Yitzchak is saying, is there's something about being a person of faith that you can only understand once you actually try it out. Is that something that resonates with people? Right, and so that's why the order, it's not about a leap of faith to say, we'll do whatever it is you tell us. It's like, we actually can't nishma until we naaseh. And that there was like an understanding of that from Bnei Israel's perspective. Like, all of this sounds good, God, but we won't really be able to understand it till we do it. And so in that way, the order becomes necessary, not just like, you know, a nice ideological principle. Great. So I want to finish with Rabbi Sachs's thoughts. So, right, he quoted a number of sources. I pulled out the Akedat Yitzchak as a particularly beautiful one. And I think Rabbi Sachs, as always, really nails it. So he says, at the level of Naaseh, the Jewish deed, we are one. Right. So to be sure, there are differences between Ashkenazim and Sephardim. In every generation, there are disagreements between leading poskim halachic authorities, and that is true in every legal system. Poor is the Supreme Court that leaves no space for dissenting opinions, yet these differences are minor in comparison with area of agreement on the fundamentals of halacha. And so I think that like maybe a good analogy is like lighting Shabbat candles, right? Jews of like all sort of different faiths, stripes, observance levels, if they, you know, many Jews choose to light Shabbat or Hanukkah candles is probably an even better one, right? I think I read in a Pew study once that like more Jews light Hanukkah candles than anything else that they do. And there's one bracha that or three brachot and then two brachot that you say, and they're standard. It's not like they change from place to place. It's not a difference of custom. You know that on that first night of Hanukkah, every Jew who lights Hanukkah candles is lighting their candle and then their shamash, right? And then saying some brachot in Hebrew or in English and Spanish, whatever the language is. But at the level of nishma, understanding, however, we are not called on to be one. Right, sorry, and I just wanted to say, right, there's like a power to that, knowing that as you light your candles, people all over the world are also lighting theirs. But maybe there's also a power to this level of nishma not being like that. So Rabbi Sachs says, Judaism has had its rationalists and its mystics, its philosophers and poets, scholars whose minds were firmly fixed on earth, and saints whose souls soared to heaven. The rabbi said that at Sinai, everyone received the revelation in his or her own way. We will do and we will understand means we will do in the same way, we will understand in our own way. I believe that action unites us, leaving us space to find our own way to faith. So here, right, for Rabbi Sachs, it's not actually, they're not conditional upon one another. They're actually different expressions of what it means to be a person who's entered into covenant with God. And so Naaseh is the things that we choose to do that unify us. And I think that action is often that thing, but there are certainly other ways we could think about it. What unifies us as a community. And then there are spaces where we can find our own way and our own path. And that's the Nishma expression. And so it's important to be able to make space for both of those things in community, right? It's helpful when people do the same thing. That makes us feel like unified and connected. But it's also helpful to say, well, you come to light Hanukkah candles because you're doing the mitzvah of Pirsumei Nisa, but I'm coming to light Hanukkah candles because it brings light into my house at a very dark time, right? And both of those people are doing the same action, the same mitzvah, but with different opinions. And I think that that richness of bringing our own opinions into the communal forum is beautiful. And to think that that comes from that very basic acceptance of covenantal relationship with God is really powerful, because it means it's like not some new invention that we, can all be the same and different and express our differences. And like, I think those are very modern concepts, but that it is a really ancient and fundamental piece of our acceptance of the covenant is, yes, God, we will Naaseh, we will do these things together, but Nishma, give us the space to do them in our own way, and to the community, give each other the space to express ourselves in our own way. But I welcome thoughts, comments, ideas.
This is Jenny. I just really resonate with the whole idea of learning through experience, and that like the primacy of experience in coming to understand something, especially something sort of abstract.
Yes. Yes, I think like Will calls them like embodied mitzvot. Those are his favorite, like tying tzitzit or keeping chickens in our backyard. Right, that those are things that like really make Will and others, I'm sure, feel like really like they're a part of the mitzvah, like they're doing the thing. Whereas some of the more less action-based or less embodied mitzvot are harder. I think there's a real power to having to do things to understand them, definitely. Is there an example that you want to share, if you would like?
I mean, some of the mitzvot, let's just say, for example, mikvah, which doesn't on paper sound so appealing, and you kind of don't appreciate the power of it until you experience it. I mean, but that's true of a lot of things.
Yeah, I think mikvah is a great example. Of all of the ideas, right? So there were 4 that were presented. So the Rashbam is like a accepting of things before and also looking forward to things that you will accept in the future. Or Rav Kook, which is that like we accepted some kind of intuitive knowledge about what it means to be Jewish or serve God or be a part of Bnei Israel. The Akedat Yitzchak, which is about needing the experience to truly understand things, or Rabbi Sachs's idea that there's like the collective action and also the unique perspectives of Naaseh v'Nishma. Is there one that resonates? So I'm hearing Jenny say the Akedat Yitzchak really resonates for her. Anything that resonates for someone else? You can think about it. Tell me on Shabbat.
I had a thought. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
okay to share.
Please.
I feel Yeah, so the explanation about the, inspiration or kind of faith, and then distinguishing that from more of the intellectual pursuit really spoke to me, because I'm a clinical psychologist, and it's actually, very similar to how we think about CBT, with actions often being needing to be the first step before changing how you think about or feel about something, but then both reinforcing one another to transform oneself. So sometimes action preceding, not waiting for inspiration, but then taking, both kind of reinforcing one another. And similarly, like for goal pursuit, sometimes we need to take steps before we're motivated, but then sometimes the steps increase that motivation. Or sometimes if we start with motivation, we don't rely on it to keep going, and we rely on those intellectual or effortful pursuits to keep going. So that part really resonated with me and made me think about, the next step, what happens after the revelation and the golden path, and how maybe the revelation, the inspiration was really important, but not enough to sustain that level of engagement. And that, in addition to, like, neither is better, and that we maybe want that the sequence is important, but both are extremely important. I think that came through in all the explanations.
I love that the inspiration is not always enough to hold you. And so that's part of doing before believing.
That was the way I felt about it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But thank you. These have been all extremely thought-provoking.
Sure. Yeah. And I think thinking about what comes after revelation is really relevant to this discussion and to like every discussion, right? Which is like, this is that ultimate experience of connection to God, whether that's like really terrifying or really beautiful. And then when it goes away, it's like, what happens the morning after? And that piece, that like happily ever after sort of ending to Disney movies, right? And people say like, what did Cinderella look like 5 years down the road? Like, who knows, right? Was that enough to sustain a relationship and a lifetime? Is a really good question. And when we do see B'nai Israel start to mess up right away, there's something disheartening about that feeling that maybe it wasn't enough. Or maybe inspiration takes like a while to sort of settle into you. And so, yeah. But it's a great point, because there's not a lot of required of B'nai Israel in the desert in terms of action, right? I mean, sort of, at least on a Pshat level. Like, there was no 3 times a day davening. There was no, Shabbat experience in the way that we experience Shabbat today. And I imagine it's very difficult to be sort of taken care of in that way, and needing to be dependent on God for all of that, and not to be busy, right? I know that some people in this community have expressed to me like they feel that way about the death of Marlene Gittleman, right? Is that like they want to like rush over with meals and pay Shiva calls, and like we have to be patient and we have to wait for that to be the right time. But it's hard for them. It's not even about Tzvi and his family necessarily, but that urgency of doing, and that's like a real thing for sure. So maybe it was like a gift that Hashem said, like, Naaseh first. Get busy, and then you can work it out. I like that. It's beautiful. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us. Next week, we will be meeting, but we will not talk about Parsha. We will talk about the Shemitah year and its implications, which should be really exciting. We'll talk about Shemitah Kesafim, which is release of financial debt, and how we could think about it today in a country where we have lots of financial debt that followed people for long, long periods of time. But have a wonderful end to your week and a Shabbat Shalom, and I'll see you soon.